I actually see parts of the split this year. The alchemical separation, the volatility of that, I see in 2025. We're actually now in the sweet spot of that larger timeline split. As this video is being recorded, I had felt a war. The Revelations video, it's talking about 5D consciousness in 3D. I travel there a lot because I go into the quantum field. There's a time speeding up beyond just my perceptual reality. We get more exhausted because not only are we going through upgrades, we're actually traveling through multiple different timelines. Just a testament of how much you have an unstoppable spiritual awakening happening.
So for those that aren't headed in that 5 density direction, what happens to them?
This is where mysticism gets really savage. 2025, and I don't know if you've watched my stuff, I'm not into prophecies much. A lot of my guidance has actually been to break people out of that concept while still understanding that there is a structure and there is an ancient momentum, shall we say, running through the pulse of the human experience that comes to what we could look at like maturation points. In the law of one, the best way I could really point to a spiritual context already established would be the concept of the harvesting. But there's always some like maturation or graduation point. And so how we commune with that though is very important. And that's why a lot of my guidance has been around getting people to not connect with it at a very like fundamentalist level, but rather understand our own kind of like spiritual essence and its relationship to these larger sections of time. And the structured, we could look at it, momentum pulsating through it, that can be looked at as prophecy. I hope that's making sense so far. Because how we connect with that, at what level, will determine how much we ourselves are growing and developing in those cycles of time and through these structures of time. So we incarnate into these different densities or these different space-times. And why the timeline split is so important right now is because we could look at it like there's always these like potential future outcomes. And there's always like ways that we're able to experience new cycles of time. But the larger cycles of time that are encompassing the smaller or even medium cycles of time, they come to, I think the word precipice is great. They come to a precipice or a peak point. And so we're actually now in the sweet spot, like in the entry part of that larger timeline split rather than the smaller cycles. And so another way of saying that, just to kind of pull together the thing that I had introduced before, was that larger timeline split, that opportunity there that's presented in this age, is also what I was referring to as like a harvest or a graduation point.
It's interesting because at this particular moment in time, you've also referred to it in some ways that this is the time that the revelations were written for and about. And you also, it was really fascinating to see you sort of unpack what the book of Revelations actually was called previously and actually what it actually really meant. Can you guide us through like what this time sort of forecasts, foreshadows, and many of the misunderstandings that we have from that lens?
Yeah, so the funny thing is that one, I want to start off by saying I got a lot of feedback from that video, way more feedback that it was helpful, but a lot of feedback that it's called revelation, not revelations, and that I was persistently saying revelations in the video. And I just want to, for once, just pull out the Mandela effect card just once. I'm not going to do this all the time, but like I could have sworn it was revelations. And I had passed that to 2 people afterwards, and they had sworn it was Revelations as well, but whatever. So the Revelations video, I actually had felt what we are in the middle of as this video is being recorded, a war. And I had felt that, and I thought, well, now's a good time to kind of help people before this point to understand revelations before or after the point, because everything is more easier to manipulate once something highly traumatic, shocking, violent is introduced to the psyche of the collective. And so communing with these concepts ahead of time as refreshers, I didn't by any means introduce this concept, that it wasn't through me, right? This has been established, but just introducing it to my audience is one that I feel will really help people kind of like benefit from this time period in a way where they're not so bound to the external violence and to the external manipulations that are happening, because it is always easier when we're in a vulnerable and susceptible and very confused state. And so what that video was about was really me trying to tap into the most esoteric level of that text that I truly believe the group of people that it goes by, John, but all of them were written by groups of people anyways. Like whoever wrote one of those books, we don't even know who wrote any of those books. So, and that's fact. Like, that's not like my opinion. So when we see a book that's presented by, any one of the books that we see, whether it's in the canon or whether it's just, and, even things that I love and regard, like the Gospel of Mary, that wasn't written by Mary. That was just the name. So these books is like a game of telephone. They started off one way, but the powers that were don't ever let something go to waste. They're so impersonable. They will give you your own holiday while they're twisting your message. It's not about even a lot of the times demeaning things. Sometimes it's very much about that. But a lot of times they will give you your own holiday because they twisted your message. So what they care about is really the distortion of a message to preserve power, preserve control, and really distort things so that nobody knows which from whatever. Because of that reason, I care very little for any of the kind of like, shall we say, sacred blueprints from before this time period. It's not because I have no respect. I have a lot of reverence for mysticism. I'm a mystic. It's simply because what I have learned is that if a person is truly developing themselves, they can be just as clear as channel instead of really grabbing on to things that at a certain point is like tricycle wheels. It's like you don't need that. And what I see is a lot of people even fighting about, well, they meant this and that. And it's like, why? You poor thing that you can't just experience that truth and resonate with it yourself. That now it's about all of this different bureaucrats or politics of religion, politics of spiritual systems. And so why that video, Revelations, was so important is because I truly feel that I was tapping in to the original context of the group of people who had created that text before it was turned into super and hyper external events. And I'm not saying that there's not that layer there, but before it got turned into a holiday, shall we say, I truly believe that I was tapping into and just refreshing, just reintroducing the esoteric concept of them. And I'm not the first one to do that. I'm definitely not the first, but it is always an honor to reintroduce things in the age that I'm in.
Can you describe some of the esoterics of that? Because peeling back the layer of previously it was called, is it the apocalypses? Or can you dial us through what was going on there esoterically behind that?
Yeah, I was having a talk with my dad. He loved that video. He's Muslim. He loved that video. And he said, "Can I ask you a question? How do you know that it's unveiling. And I said, because I saw it with my own eyes. And so it's one of those things where if you experience that level of unveiling to yourself, then it makes sense why the original text was called an unveiling. That's what apocalypse means. And so an unveiling, like, what would need, if a person truly experiences that direct contact beyond the veil, beyond, many people have said there's 9 veils, but then some I've heard, like 5. So there's always a system of veils. But even that, the fact that in mysticism it's known, like veils is a term. It makes more sense that this was a mystical book, because even the term veils is well known in mysticism for being dimensions and for being spaces. You could look at it in between dimensions, or spaces in between, like our reality and then the reality above ours. Everything's from within and out, but you know what I mean by above. So the unveiling, like, makes complete sense that it was called that, because that's usually when there's a highly large block or veil out of the way, and now you're having either, I mean, in this age, there's many people going into the controlled states of out-of-body experiences. So back in the day, there was as well, actually. It was called Merkaba Ascension. But anyways, so there's a lot of people that were having these direct experiences. But even if it's not one where you're controlled and you're going out of body and you're in control and you're doing it with your own will, there was just a lot of intense communion, shall we say, with our higher self, or with God, source. And so unveiling makes perfect sense as having this internal reckoning of you and your true identity with no buffers in between them.
It's really interesting as well, because we've got this whole concept around the final judgment. And I found it really fascinating because the final judgment seems very wrathful and very like it's the end, yeah? And tuning into your work, it was quite profound to be introduced to it as in, actually, no, this could be a very profound ascension point where we actually transcend judgment once and for all. I mean, that completely blew the lid on my thinking.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, for sure that, like 100% for sure that. And then what you have is judgment means a spiritual awakening, but like a high level one. It's high enough to call it judgment. So even that is still pointing in, if people understand the deeper layers of mysticism, then you could read that text and go, oh, this is a mystical text. This is talking about an inner process, because judgment is known as a high level spiritual awakening. And then if we want to put it once again into the timeline split and into a concept or some sort of structure now, judgment would be your frequency. And I know that sounds weird, but it's actually because at the time of large cycles, the energies are ripe for a lot of different things. I even see some people leaving this whole universe, but that's usually not like one of the main things that we go to in the spiritual community or in this age. We don't go to like, we're leaving this universe. We usually just say, oh, we're graduating to the next point. So because of that, I see a lot of different like groups of consciousness, and whatever their curriculum, you could look at it that way. I love looking at it like a curriculum because it's so unconditional and neutral. And a lot of times it's hard. A part of my job is navigating these terms without having superiority placed on them, but just having clarity and discernment. And so when I look at this in its truest form, it's just curriculum. That's all. And so when you're an eternal being, you don't, it's no judgment how long something takes to, acquire that curriculum. And so because of that, all of that to say that judgment in this third layer is really interesting, because what it actually is that everyone has a specific frequency that cannot lie. So it doesn't matter what we say. It doesn't matter if I say like, oh, there's no cup in my hand, if there's a cup in my hand. So actually judgment is saying, I see your frequency beyond whatever you're portraying. And this goes back to the law of one material. They said that like your words will not be what brings you into graduation. It's all a matter of frequency by the time it comes to pass. And so that's actually what judgment means. It's not necessarily judgment meaning you're punished. And it's definitely not a judgment meaning that you are being judged in the way that traditionally we think of judged. It's more so just this objective bystander of what is, the transparency, remember back to unveiling. You're just seen fully. You're seen beyond all preconceptions, and what's being seen is your frequency. And that's very vital too, because if a person has a frequency that's ready for the next, why would you put somebody through experiences that they are not prepared for? Or why would you ask like a 3-year-old to do something that's supposed to be a 15-year-old? That's another way of saying it. So because of that, the judgment at this level that I'm talking about it at is literally not necessarily judgment. It's saying you are fully seen, and now is the time of where your frequency will best be served next for its curriculum.
Inspired souls, I wanted to take a moment to thank all of you that are subscribed to this podcast. Everything you see around here is powered and empowered by your subscription to this channel. Thank you so much for your incredible love and your support. To all of you that haven't yet subscribed, please do take a moment. As I'm saying the word subscribe, the button below is lighting up in the colors of the Inspired Evolution. Please hit that subscribe button, hit the bell notification icon, and join the community. Thank you so much in advance for your incredible love and support. And for those of you that are looking to dive in even deeper into a sense of community, we have the Inspired Evolution Circle. That's inspiredevolution.com/circle, where we meet guests like Sarah once a month, an opportunity for yourself as the audience to ask questions directly of such guests. And we also meet, you and I, weekly in community Zoom calls online. And those are just a couple of things of the many community offerings brewing inside the circle right now. We're currently calling in our first 100 founding members. So if you'd like to be part of the seeding intention of this community online, join us at inspiredevolution.com/circle. Again, link on screen, link in the description below. It'd be an honor to walk that path with you. So let's talk about the split and what people are likely to experience, because people use the term 5D, 3D quite a bit when it comes to the split. Is that, can you help us understand what this split really is? Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so when we're talking about like 5D and 3D, I love that we all just know that 4D is like, wah, wah, wah. It's like a hallway. And what brings us into 5D is the level of consciousness. So this is what we know as unity consciousness. So back to Revelation, even that is talking about 5D, in my personal opinion. It's talking about 5D consciousness in 3D. And then even you could look at a lot of the different, because in 5D there's not time. I'm sure you know that. But in 5D there's not time anywhere near how it's like here. It's vastly different. Some people say it's no time. My gnosis has seen still time. But if we look at time almost like the webs of spider webs. And those spider webs we can also look at like the fabric of space and time. And then another way now to look at it once more is the fabric of space and time is also what we're calling a matrix, because a matrix simply means an animal, a womb's tissue. So it's always feminine, and it's known as the arena, or what I'm calling womb matrix of space-time. In the fifth dimension, or density really, it's really density, but in the fifth density, there's still, back to those spider webs, there's still a matrix. There's still space-time. It's just far different than how it functions here. And every density up until you're out of this universe, time, meaning the fabric, is far different, far lighter. And even when I say fabric, that was an illustration. Now that I said that, we can pull back having to look at it like fabric, because it's not. But that's just helpful to get us there. So even the fifth density is what we could consider. I said all of that, but we could consider that still no time, because to the third density, to us, it would be like, what is this? This is no time. I travel there a lot because I go into the quantum field for my energy practice. And so it does not function at all like how time operates here. For all intents and purposes, we can call it no time. Even though I just said all of that, it's still experienced us as no time. So the shift from 3D into 5D is not just back to the timeline split and back to revelation. Being able to anchor this oneness, this high level of spiritual awakening into the third density that we're in. But on top of that, the text even takes place in and out of time, which is even more solidifying that this is in and out of densities. This is like half written for this density, half not. It goes in and out, suggesting that these are actually more like outside of time themes. And so the beauty of that is that like when something's weaving in and out, that's actually what's happening exactly right now. We're weaving oneness, or we're weaving unity consciousness in and out of our body, mind, spirit, or in and out of our own consciousness. And so that's how the third dimension, or the third to 5D timeline split is experienced in like a way that we can actually, beyond hyper religious illustrations and beyond beautiful words, the way that we can experience it directly is through that level of like, wow, I'm having this massive expansion, and it's bringing with it all of these different perceptions. I'm understanding things. Oh, where'd it go? Where'd it go? What? I'm in hate. I'm in the beast. And so that is the timeline shift that we're seeing. I'm also seeing it as like oil and water, where it gets to a certain point where the consistency solidifies in a good way. This is what we would call crystallization. I've done a video on crystallization. It's this concept where you don't want to evolve too prematurely. If you go into a peak state, for instance, and you accidentally go, well, that's it, I'm here, you've capped yourself. Instead, it's like this oil and water process of going, oh, I went into a peak state, and not judging it, because I see a lot of people like shaming that now. And it's like, why would you shame that? That's like somebody making a pizza and you start shaming them because they're not done. So it's like you go into a peak state and you're not going to stay there. And that's why it's called a peak state. But that's also an ingredient in the process. It's a part of the stages. And so you're going into this peak state and then you're coming back in. And so there's this like ebb and flow, of course, with everything. And so that's a process. And that's, you know, the spiritual awakening journey. But even within all of that, there becomes this like consistency, kind of like back to oil and water, where they do separate, but in a positive way. And that's called crystallization. It's when you've been doing the work enough to solidify an I. An I in mysticism is like, it's like when you have got to a point inside the great work that now you can truly say you are a sovereign being. So everything before then is kind of like a lot of things within the journey that, you know, we're pulling from inspiration. We're figuring things out. We're, you know, going into the somaticness, the visceralness of the emotional body. We're going into the peaks of expansion of the mind. So we're doing all of these things. But at any point in that process where we accidentally, I see this more accidentally, where we accidentally think that like we have attained a very consistent level, back to that consistency, and we have not genuinely yet, that's called false crystallization. So in mysticism, all of this is already known. And the best way to describe it is like falsely crystallizing, which is what I call, because when I see it, it's just calcifying. So it's something that's hardened too soon. So if something has hardened too soon before it's fully crystallized, that becomes an issue because nothing can really grow then. Do you see how if something's calcified, then the false self can't grow? So there's all these different things that would represent that, but I'm sure you get the picture. And then that rising process, that oil and water that genuinely comes into that state, it will happen naturally. Let me qualify that. It will happen if you're doing it. And then you'll just be sad it's happening, but it will be happening. So at that point, that's the oil and water that I'm talking about that separates, and that would be true crystallization. True crystallization, that's what also we would consider like the process of 3D to 5D. It would be that oil and water, that crystallization process that's happening. And so once we get to a level, I'll never say anything in like a finality term, like once we're fully enlightened, what would that even mean? So once we've gotten to a specific level of true crystallization, of true embodiment of unity consciousness in a working, functional way, that would be what we'd experience as the 5D timeline split. Because the other parts of that, I'm not saying that that's the only part. The other parts of that would literally take place in a completely different density.
It's interesting when you change the verbiage from dimensionality to density. It grounds it in a lot more, but then also it starts to speak to certain things that I guess are happening at this moment in time. More and more people are waking up to extrasensory abilities and stuff like that, and it sort of opens up, you know, you being in this sort of third density. It's hard to visualize extra density, but like as you start to open up into that, it's like, oh, in order to navigate those extra components, obviously the more senses might be coming online to help navigate said things, right? So it's interesting change, like even just sort of accurately sort of just going from dimension to density. One of the questions I've got for you is what are the hallmarks that this is happening now?
This is really interesting because it can sound completely tone deaf, but it won't if a person's truly there. And that's one of the hallmarks, is that you can literally understand that what's happening inside the world, as horrific, as violent, as shocking, as overwhelming, as anxious as it is, and you are none of those. And it's not because you're disconnected, and it's not because you haven't emotionally processed enough. It's actually because you have. And there's a specific level, just like the oil and water. There's a specific level of being able to see these things, but you're not coming from such a level of what I would call base consciousness. You're not coming from, oh, what does this mean for me because I am a human and I'm meant to live forever, until my subconscious said that. That's usually when I kind of saw enough movies to program myself to leave this reality. Like, you have been beyond your personal self. And I'm not saying beyond its basic needs. You'll always, have the self-love that's required for your experience. But you're in such a level of self-love, and you're vibrating at such a level of love, that you can be the actual solution in the world. A lot of times, and I fell for this a lot inside, past parts of my journey, when I wanted to very much invest in a group identity. Group identities can hold you hostage at a specific level. And, like, we go through rites of passage where we outgrow them and then we meet new groups, so this isn't about not having groups. It's more like having people that are on your level. And that's very important, because what I see going on a lot is like this beautiful, but like kind of like covert tactic that we're using on our spiritual awakening journey. And what that is going like, oh, I can be a higher solution. I can be a higher level of what the world needs, but it would kind of look tone deaf. And so how that would be experienced, the question at hand was asked, was how a person would know that that's happening is when they're able to not be so overwhelmed by whatever way the outside world wants you to feel, like you're some vending machine. You're not a vending machine anymore. You're not like, if I push these buttons, you'll react this way. I can get this out of you. I could get this negative emotion out of you whenever I want. All I have to do is show you this. And so it's actually highly, like high frequency. It's not disconnected at all. You're coming from such a state of direct experience and direct knowing that the world is still in pain. And it doesn't mean that your heart doesn't ache, but your heart doesn't ache in a specific way. It doesn't ache in a way where it feels like so overcrushed by everything and that we're helpless. So yeah, I hope that explained one of the signs, because that's the biggest one. And I know that sounds kind of tone deaf, but like it's honestly the best marker for a person to really understand what's going on. Because when a person can truly come from love, but not come from the love that was they were manipulated into, shall we say, but they're truly coming from a state of love, and that love doesn't need to be like, I have to be in pain because that's what love is, or I have to be this because that's what love is. Like I've only seen people who aren't in pain and who are conscious be more about the world. So it is not this like me or them type deal. And so because of that, we can truly be the solution in the world. And I would even add that we let the powers that were get away when we react in ways that will feed them what they want. So not feeding them what they want actually veers the timelines drastically.
Yeah. Can you tell us more about, because that's the esoteric internally, what's going on for us? And I mean, quite poetically, I've seen you put it before, it's like it's literally as simple as service, well, not simple, as clear as service to self, service to others, right? Like service to self, service to others in terms of discerning in like esoterically what's going on for the individual as this split is opening up. Externally, what are some of the things that we can see in the third density that are like hallmarks of like, oh, this is definitely happening right now. Like it's incumbent upon us to do this internal work.
Like every single thing that's happened this year, like every week. Like this whole week, this whole year has been revelation. And I'm like, yeah, it's event after event after event. That's large. It's not, like statewide. It's global events after events, whether they're cataclysms or whether they're this or whether they're that, just really large events. And so it really is up to how a person wants to perceive what they're experiencing, what the world's experiencing. And the reason I say that is because a lot of people might view like, hey, this whole thing happened as like, wow, this means doom for everyone. But that could literally be people who are ushered into a completely different timeline. And so they're not a part of our timeline anymore. And so the meaning we assign to specific things could be one of doom, or they could be ones of just really understanding, once again, curriculum, really understanding how to support others, how to support, purpose is undeniable. The more a person becomes aware, the more they care about purpose. I've never seen one person who's gone through any form of spiritual awakening or gone through any questioning of their reality or their life who's been like, I don't care about purpose. I've heard what's the meaning, but that's still caring about a purpose. And so even if the highest purpose and the highest meaning is one that is like, it's you, it's whatever you want to be, that's still what we like. That's still kind of like something we're always called into communing with, no matter what. And so because of that, what I see is a lot of people also being able to actually access whatever they're considering their purposes, where there was once a lot of just blocks. And that's because a lot of the old systems energies that were holding those solutions, those opportunities, those passion projects, whatever you want to call it, there's not those energetic blocks anymore.
This podcast is brought to you by my one-to-one mentorship. The podcast is designed to inspire your evolution onwards, upwards, and inwards. And if you're ready to dive in even deeper and evolve your career, your leadership, and business in a conscious direction, and you believe that alignment to your purpose and your soul's direction is the only way to truly thrive into your highest potential, and right now you can feel that guidance, mentoring, and coaching would be of support, then my one-to-one mentorship coupled with our incredible conscious group masterminds is here for you. Thousands of people have evolved through my mentoring over the last 10 years. It is, after all, my highest calling, and here's what they have to say about how it's transformed their life.
I've had massive transitions while working with Amrit.
I'm processing things in real time. I'm addressing what I want to do, and so much more is possible.
Amrit's sessions were really helpful. They inspired me to go after my dream job, which I have now, and I'm loving it.
Amrit doesn't really see it as just coaching, but he honestly cares about you, and you can feel it. That's just priceless. I just love it.
If you're looking for someone to help you evolve as a person, hands down, Amrit.
So if you're ready to dive in even deeper to take your inspirations and truly evolve, then make your way over to my website at amritsandu.com. I'll put a link in the description below. You don't have to go it alone. There's one-to-one mentoring and an incredible community mastermind of conscious leaders, entrepreneurs, and people transforming their careers and business into full alignment with their soul's highest calling, creating a life that inspires them on the deepest level, living into their greatest impact. And as many of you know, connection is my highest value, so I'm looking forward to connecting with you. Use the button below, use the link below, amritsandu.com/call. That's AMRIT Sandu, SANDHU.com/call. It's on screen for you now. And if you follow that link, you'll be able to book in a call directly with me. I'm looking forward to connecting with you. So go on, I'll see you there. You mentioned there's 5 domains of our frequency that we can actually work on in order to, work through this sort of time and to support us in this evolution. If I can recall them correctly, it's your thoughts, it's your emotions, you've got belief systems, actions is really important. And I almost had it. There's 5.
Then you can't make Captain Planet if you can't.
Oh no, I need the heart. Earth, fire, wind, water. Oh, what's the 5th one? What are the things that support us at this particular time? Our intentions. Thank you so much. Yeah, can you speak to those and just how they actually support us in? Because I think we talk about frequency and the importance of raising our frequency, and it can sound somewhat ephemeral, right? It's like raising your frequency can feel like this wispy, but it's actually quite tangible when you ground it into those 5 different elements in terms of how we actually show up to do the work.
Yeah, and all of them are important, but what we'll find is that a lot, like everything's all one, right? And so we'll just see that they're facets of one. They're different faces of one. And so what we'll see is that emotions hold within us the face or the facet. That's the momentum that pushed us out of the birth canal and into an experience. Because a lot of different levels of reality don't have emotions the way that we have emotions. There's a love, and there's an unconditional love, and there's a care. That's how I see it. But they're not like emotions the way that it's like raw material for manifesting here. It's very special. It's very coveted. And so then we have beliefs. And then we have thoughts, as you know, and the actions. But thoughts and emotions reflect heavily beliefs. So if I had to, even though it's this nebulous one, if I had to separate it to make correlations between them that are stronger, just for the sake of clarity, thoughts and emotions heavily reflect beliefs, which is why understanding what limiting beliefs are running the show inside our, internal, external reality is so important. And so the thoughts and the belief or emotions reflect the beliefs. That the actions reflect them all, but you have time before something comes into the form of you acted on it. So we're entirely sovereign and responsible for our actions. And sometimes there's a disconnect there because we want our intentions to shine through the most. And I could see why. I would love to have my frequency only reflect my intentions, nothing else. And so I could see why we want the intention, to weigh as much inside our field as actions. But I'm sure you've also heard the saying, what happens? What happens? It's like actions can be sorely, dangerously misguided based off of what? Our beliefs, based off of our intentions, all of that. So because of that, they all have a beautiful relationship with each other where the faces of this one are distinct, but yet they could all be like in a ceremony together. And that's my way of saying I forgot what the question was.
How these different frequencies, when we talk about raising our frequency, working with each of these 5 little subsects individually upon themselves, they actually help us, give us something grounded to work on, to work with through this time as we're going through the split. Otherwise, it's just like raise your frequency, and it was like, what does that even mean? Why is that even important? It sounds like woo-woo stuff, yeah? But actually working with these 5 elements actually gives you something tangible to work on.
Oh, absolutely. I did a video on how to manifest what you really want. And in there, I don't think I introduced intentions yet. a lot of how I teach is teaching something as a transmission. And if that transmission is understood and connected with, then, it will reveal another layer and another layer. But like, it's important to connect with something in a transmission while not also going like, oh, well, this is everything at all. And so I don't think I mentioned in that video about intentions, because I really wanted that transmission to highlight the connection between what we would consider in this age as integrity, but what also is considered in mysticism like a congruency. And so that congruency takes place in, I don't really know if it takes place in Eastern systems, all of the Eastern systems. I know it takes place in some Eastern systems. It's strong in Sufism. It's strong in Sufism. It's strong in Jewish mysticism. It's strong in Western esoterica. So developing your body, mind, spirit is what we call high frequency. But it is well known in almost every system about this congruency that needs to take place. And so congruency can also be looked at as like transparency, right? Because if you're congruent, that just means everything's transparent, everything lines up. So if you're saying something, you really feel it. And if you really feel the way that you're speaking, you're also acting in that manner so that your feelings match your thoughts, match your actions, and all three of them reflect the truth of what you are, which is just transparency. That is the actual inner work, we could call it, that would create that high frequency. And so adding in that extra element of intentions and beliefs on top of it only really helps supplement and strengthen our understanding of like, what are the steps to creating our frequency? Because as I said, beliefs are so important. A belief will make you miserable. So it's best to question that belief. Its validity. I'm not saying it's invalid. I'm saying it's best to question and understand our beliefs, because a lot of people may not even know their beliefs. And so cleaning out the body, mind, spirit, that room, it's not even a room, it's a whole command center, but that needs to be aired out. That needs to have as much communion as possible, because that can be running the show behind your entire identity, So all of these facets are all important in the same amount, in the same ratio. And sometimes in a video, I will definitely enhance one of those aspects more than the others. And that's because that's the transmission. That's the class. That's what we need to enhance at that moment. But they're all equally in ratio and in aspects to one another. Highly, highly important. And so because of that, each one of them, we will even see inside our own awakening journey, where we'll see us diving deep into, let's say, the emotional body. And we'll go strongly into that, and then we'll naturally make our way into beliefs. Or, I see that connected a lot with the manifestation community. And so that's really beneficial for understanding the subconscious and the beliefs, because that's your mainframe. That's your motherboard. So then from there, intentions, right? That would be when you get to the highest, I would say, level. I mean, that's just in my opinion as of right this moment. Like, I might go to bed and then wake up and go, oh, wait, it's actually this. But right now, like, when a person is concerned with intention, that is like a very high level of, a person doesn't really start caring about intention unless one, they were already just, they're a natural. They just are already, because some people come in like where that's not a problem. They want to help and they have good intentions. But then if that's not something that was like innate, that's something that a person will, just like all the rest of the different components of frequency, they will naturally mature into intent. And so all of these are important. And it's just a matter of like which stage of our journey. And it's not even in order. I wouldn't necessarily say it's all in order. Where I started my own spiritual awakening journey from is nowhere near how a lot of other people started it. It's kind of like, I'm like, oh yeah, you guys did experience that? Oh yeah, me neither. So we're all just in different paths, but we're all headed in the same direction, so to speak. The ones who are headed in that direction.
So for those that aren't stepping into greater and greater levels of congruence and aren't headed in that 5 density direction, what happens to them?
Okay, so this is where mysticism gets really savage. I would agree too. I'm not just saying this because mysticism, but it's kind of like my buffer, like my invisible friend whose hand I hold to say what I have to say. And so in mysticism, it's very savage. There is in, different spiritual systems, we could use Pythagorean mystery school. They have a process known as metempsychosis. And then I've even heard one that mirrors from a different physics, from a different spiritual system altogether, but in this age, a very elaborate system that mirrors exactly Pythagorean mystery school, metempsychosis. So this is also what I've seen. I see that there's this slow, we could call it a cannibalizing. I forget, there's 2 words for the processes that take place in the body. There's anabolic and
Catabolic.
Catabolic, yeah. Okay, so this goes into one where it starts to consume itself. And so if we look at that at a body, mind, spirit level, I'll even pull now from Rosicrucianism. They call it a donation. I think that's a beautiful term for saying you de-evolved. You devolved? No, you didn't, because everything is everything. So you went to something, you went to the natural environment, you went to the local environment. And that would be what, honestly, 5 different, I could even probably think of more than 5, but I'll just say for sure 5 different spiritual systems, as well as my own gnosis, sees it. I see it as a process of decomposition, just like you decompose something for the soil. But that soil is now what we look at as the most required, essential nature for another birth, which all just reminds me now of a 6th thing, which is the law in physics about energy. Nothing is destroyed in a sense where it's just changing forms. And so it's just as there's an ascension impulse, which we could look at one to crystallize, there is also going to be the equal and opposite descension impulse. And if that is not of crystallizing, which would be to create an I, then it would be the opposite. It would be to fragment. And to fragment so thoroughly that now you are a part of the essential nature of that local environment. That's a nice way of saying you become stardust.
It almost sounds like you become the soil and the fodder for what the new is built upon, which is actually, like you said, it's pretty brutal. And for those that do the work, I mean, is it a perceived, felt sense and change that we actually experience, or is it subterranean in terms of the experience that we shift into as you move into the 5th density?
Yeah, and it actually, you get enough freedom that it's funny because there's always this dance going on inside this universe between light and the absence of light, because we're in a universe of light. But it doesn't just take that form. It splits into polarity. So this is where we get the Hermetic laws. So the Hermetic laws are all based off of a spectrum where there's polarities. And it's just teaching you that. And it's teaching you that in 7 different ways. So you have that. And then I even believe, there's 12 laws, but there's always this like core theme of there being in a universe of light. You see this dance between two things that doesn't have to be a dance, but it's a dance if you are able to. And so when it comes to that, I'm getting at that there's free will and then there is fate. And so, well, at least if we're gonna, this is how I perceive it. This is how also Fourth Way, which I came from, perceives it. And so within that, what you'll have is that there's this freedom. That's why the I is being cultivated in the first place. Why would we need to be sovereign if we did not have a free will? Some sort of to steward our path forward. Now with that, as I said earlier, there's always this like two extremes within this universe, and they play out in different ways. So we might not even see it. We might see it as light and dark, but that's also playing out as masculine and feminine. So there's always this polarity. And then it even happens through freedom and unity. And so this is the part that I'm getting at to answer your question. Freedom means like an independent impulse. So it's a one to individualize. But then unity means that there is ultimately a unity, a oneness. And so at a certain point, it's like, how do I make sense of one of these if I can make sense of them at all? Is it just one and we go and we experience that, or is it the other? And we would be in good company if we were to explore only one, because not everyone has that level of paradox to move through them and to be the one in the all. And so sometimes we explore a path of only freedom. And then it will invert. They will always invert. I don't know if that's a law in physics, but that's my gnosis. They will always invert. So they'll reach a point to where they will invert and become the opposite, the very opposite of what that impulse was. So because of that, what you have is freedom and unity. And to answer your question now, knowing that that's where I'm located while we're talking about this, there will be a freedom, but it's a part of a unity. What I mean by that is Sarah, with her free will, developed herself to this degree. But is Sarah really the one after this experience that's gonna make it the same way to 5D? No, it will be my unity. It will be like a different version of Sarah that I'm calling my unity. We could call it higher self. We could call it a parallel Sarah. We could call it many future Sarah. I always say, when I do something that hooked me up in the present moment, I always go, oh, past Sarah hooked me up. So it's like a past Sarah had free will, but the unity is not my will, which is when you hear things like a divine will, there's your will and then a divine will, and then the work is to merge them. So all of that to say, some people will truly, because their unity, their higher self, is located in the experience of that 5D. They are located there. They can feel it. They can smell it. This is why you hear, I'm sure you've even had people on this show that are seeing the new earth and they're seeing bleed throughs. And then there's some people who have had, let's say, more revolutions of a cycle. It's not even more, because what is more? More could actually mean something has gone awfully astray. So more doesn't always mean better at all. But I get, you understand what I mean. Has had enough revolutions of cycles. And now when they're surrendering to their unity, their free will, they might not go there. There might be a different experience that their higher self is now located in that is already bleeding through, but it won't just be what someone else's bleed through is. Does that make sense?
A little bit, yeah. It leads into one of my questions, which is for those people that potentially feel divine will but don't perceive it as divine will and find it difficult to trust that, how do they learn to work with that?
That's a great question. I think if somebody has an issue with divine will, either two things happen. One, surrender is now what they will need. They have exhausted actions, thoughts, beliefs for a reason. Sometimes we need to get burnt out. So we'll because we're like we have too much will, shall we say? We go like, no, I want that. I want that. So we either, one, are not in trust, and that will only come, it won't come like, I trust. Like, it will come through the surrender of exhaustion. This is also painted, we spoke about this last time, of like wrestling an angel on Mount Pineal. That's that exhaustion that I'm talking about, because it's not always portrayed as like, oh my God, I was so open and I was so willing and I was so in a state of surrender. It's usually kind of like a struggle with our higher self. But then there's a second thing that it could be. And that could be the person truly has aspects inside their subconscious that can seem adversarial, but are actually their intuition in disguise. And their intuition is going, no, I have to do this. And they just don't know what that thing is. So instead of following that flow of like, what am I interested in? Or why am I so curious about that? Instead of following like breadcrumbs where something will lead in order for them to develop enough into let's just call it a version of themselves that now they can merge their will with the divine will. And so it is always a game between passive and active. It's like, what parts do I let go and, allow trust and trust in ourselves, not trust in anything external, like trust that when the time comes, I'll feel aligned with whatever my actions are or whatever I'm lining up with. And then the dance between that passivity, shall we say, and the activeness of getting ourselves in a truly aligned position enough to genuinely be in that passive or surrendered state and not in a denial or bypassing form because we had accidentally measured or gauged ourselves somewhere when we really weren't. And so it's always this dance. That's why I teach discernment. Because all of the cool, groovy things about like DNA activations and upgrades and all of that actually comes like strongest through a vessel of discernment. That in, like a lot of different ways, but I'm just focusing on discernment. So discernment gives us at least the awareness that this is even happening, because half of the thing is happening at a subconscious level. It's too vague for even us to grasp or clarify what's going on. But once we do, that's half of the issue, because now we'll go, you know what? I might be in a state of avoidance and calling it surrender. Or we might be in, you know what? I just force every action I take. Every action I take comes from force. So knowing the wisdom in between those two and our control in that process is very important. And then also it's different for each person. And that's why I think a lot of the spiritual systems we have today are super helpful. For instance, human design or gene keys, like these are very, high level tools that we have. And they will help a person understand specifically their, body, mind, spirit's makeup which will also save them. It will save them so much time.
Yeah, big time. That's I put together a new program recently called Vision Quest, where we go through a person's astrology, human design, gene keys, their values and their strengths before we even start mapping out their vision. Because there's no point in mapping out a vision if it's not built on your authentic blueprint. After that,
Wow.
we then go, okay, let's build out your vision. And this was a bit novel, but I kind of build out a vision on the 12 houses of the zodiac, kind of taking each of those domains of your life and then sort of building it out. So it's been a bunch of fun guiding people through that process. It takes time, but it's absolutely worth it, right?
Nice.
One of the things I do want to get further into clarity, discernment, because you use discernment a lot, and I want to dive into there. But before I do, just at this point in the conversation, I'm feeling at the moment when I'm speaking to a lot of people in spiritual circles and communities, they're feeling very tired. They're feeling a bit worn out. They're feeling a bit, less than energized, let's call it that. I wonder if that's got to do with potentially what's being called upon them at this time and what they're trying to show up for, and whether there's quite a body of work that they're working through at the moment. Like, if there is tiredness in someone's field, what would you put that down to at this particular moment in time?
We're going through massive upgrades. That's actually why I just recently did a video on upgrades. It's because of that. And like, my physical vehicle body is so tired, and I had like large energy just even a month ago. And now I like, so those are upgrades, and they might not even feel like it because like, I'll even go as far as to say the upgrades are so powerful that many different agendas are placed in front of us because of the power of the upgrades we're experiencing. And so they're almost trying to be counterbalanced. So it's almost a compliment in a sick way of just how powerful, just a testament of just how much you have an unstoppable spiritual awakening happening. That's, it may not be like, as I said, the polarities is that split. Isn't that so fitting that even as I was talking about the polarities in all of this universe, that's even in a timeline split, literally. And so the momentum that those who are spiritually going through a spiritual awakening have already created for that mitosis, that natural rebirthing process to reveal itself, is so powerful. I would actually just call it unstoppable. I would call it imminent. And so because of all of that momentum, we are experiencing things at the body, mind, spirit level that are like almost like a feedback loop. We've gone through so much expansion, and now because of that, it's like a catch-22 or a feedback loop where it's like, then more is given, then more it's giving. And so that's experienced. I've heard this, I'm sure you've heard it a lot, is like time speeding up.
Big time. Yeah.
Yeah. And the funny thing is that with time speeding up, we have to be careful about like a natural bias, because adults experience time differently than children. And so because of that, time literally is faster for adults. And so I've had to check my own bias because time is like on hyperdrive for me.
Yeah, because we already have hedonic adaptations that's happening as we're getting older and older. So the time starts to feel more crunched because it's less novel, our experience of a human being. But then literally it is speeding up, and it's like, is it speeding up to this degree? Like it can be quite difficult to discern, right?
Right. It's like a game. It's like spiritual awakening or getting older. So, and that's one of them. And so, but I will still say, I do feel there's a time speeding up beyond just my perceptual reality. And so because of that, it's like we get sometimes more exhausted because not only are we going through upgrades, we're actually traveling through multiple different timelines. That's what my next video is actually about. It's like a build your own adventure. That's going to sound kind of like odd because it's like, no, one experience needs to take place inside this reality, but not really. And it just becomes a measure of degree. And so because of that, there's a lot of different potential outcomes. And I'm not even talking about 5 years from now. I'm talking about potential outcomes even within next week and the week, even within 2 days from now, that we're surfing. That's why I love that term, transurfing reality. We're transurfing realities. We're transurfing those timelines. And that's actually also what's making us tired. And I would call that in like equal ratio to the upgrades themselves.
Hey there, Inspired Souls. We just mentioned Vision Quest. If you want to find out more about that program, you can find it in the link and the description below. I'll put it on screen for you now as well. There'll be a button up top if you want to go check it out. But basically helping you build out your authentic soul's blueprint based on astrology and human design and your gene keys and understanding your values and your key strengths in this lifetime, and then approaching building your vision based on all that authentic self-understanding and making sure that the vision you build is directly related to that self, not something that's somebody else's, and then building that vision in a 12-dimensional way across all the different domains of the zodiac. If that's interesting to you, please join us. Vision Quest. Links, like I described, above, on screen, and below in the description for you. See you there. Okay, I do want to talk more about timelines, but before I get there, I did say I'd talk about clarity, discernment, and judgment. So the interesting thing here is I feel like when I hear the word judgment, I don't want to sound judgmental of judgment. Here we go. But it sounds very callous, low vibration, sort of, like it's not going to be an enlightened sort of intention to sort of carry judgment. But when you speak to discernment, it feels very nuanced. And it seems quite a bit more elevated. But how do you discern, sorry, I'm using the same words within asking for the question, but how do you discern between discernment and judgment? And then I can also feel maybe like the highest intention around those guys is clarity. So clarity, discernment, judgment. I mean, because I can feel if I was consistently judging, I'd probably be getting further and further entrenched within my ego. There's probably clarity which leads into the highest truth. But then this discernment piece is something that you deploy and work with quite actively. Can you give it some scope within here and sort of explain discernment and how it's not a trapping and it's not the same as judgment?
Absolutely. You already really have a strong clarity around it. So that's good. It's not as nebulous as presented. There's judgments straight up is about intent. Judgments will strengthen and reinforce and enmesh themselves into your identity and keep you maxed at very ego consciousness. And that's the whole intent of it, because discernments still have judgments within them. I usually talk about these at my live events. I should probably talk about them on my channel, but like the nuances of spiritual awakening, I'm like, nah, let's talk about space goats from Revelation. So, I'm like, let's save the human stuff for the small group of people. So the discernment has judgments within it. And sometimes there's no judgments at all. And if you get there, great. But it's all about, as you said, intention, because there's a complete distinct difference between being in judgments versus being in discernment, and judgments are arising from your state of discernment. There is, okay, so this is actually what will clarify it. Triggers. Because a person who's entrenched in judgments is easily insulted, easily offended, right? Like hell on earth is separation consciousness. Putting out, not realizing they're getting it back, just what they're putting out, all that's separation consciousness. So it's literally living. Like separation consciousness is hell, but so it's when you're so locked in judgments, you will just suffer. You will suffer everything. Like, this is why there's a difference even between victimhood and victim mentality. because in judgments, you are stuck in a chrysalis, but instead of one to transform in a butterfly, you're stuck in one of victim mentality versus victimhood, which would probably be another events gathering that's way too human and helpful for my channel. So judgments is suffering, and triggers we could look at are so strong about that because you're in judgment. So what does that do? What's the emotional terminology for judgments? It'd be trigger. So you see whatever it is and you're like mad, and you're infused with emotional temperament charge about your perception because it's not presenting the way you want it to present or it should be in whatever your judgment is. Versus discernment, you're still going to have triggers or charges around something while you're in discernment. So you're still going to have the residue of judgments arise from that level of clarity. Remember how I said earlier how everything will invert back into itself, and it's just understanding the paradox to create that internal harmony that we know as alchemy. That internal alchemy is also with judgments and discernment being two different poles. What we're looking at is not to get to a state of clarity through complete no judgments ever. Maybe sometimes that will be the highest good. That will be the greater good. But that's not even necessarily the perfect, if I'd have to call it the ideal distinction between discernment and judgments. The primary distinction would be what you said. It would be that judgments, just that becomes your whole construct, your whole, self-concept into a lower frequency completely. And then you become locked there even. Versus having discernment and having charges, which we can call judgments, but having the residue of that arise from it. I'll give you a clear example because I think this is clear, but I don't know. So if I see a person being tortured, okay, I'm going to feel mad. Then there's going to be all these things that arise from my clarity. So my clarity and discernment is a being is harmed, and regardless of whatever happened before I saw this, they're being harmed to a degree that I can at least confidently say is not warranted. Whatever that was. Okay, but I'm going to have charges around that. So I know this is an extreme example, but this is just to show in an extreme way the difference between having discernment and judgments will arise. So you're watching something, and are you in clarity about something being a specific way? Yes. But does that mean that you're completely void of things arising from that? Like, this shouldn't be. That's a judgment. People shouldn't get harmed. That's another judgment. No one should. So all of these judgments can arise from still that discernment versus somebody who's having a completely different experience altogether. They're just in judgment and they're entrenched in judgment. And so even a broken clock is right twice a day. They're going to judge, and they're going to be right sometimes because that's what happens to anyone. But still, the larger issue here is the distinction and the intent. And with that, it's entrenched more into judgments, aka becomes separation consciousness. Because you'll get to such a separate point inside your way of being, inside your perception, that anything that's not something super narrow is what is accepted as whatever it is, spiritual system, perception, way of life, fill in the blank. Versus there's still being like something we can call health, whether that's food or just lifestyle, whatever it is, something called health, which has a clarity to it, right? And will still produce a charge if we see that being, highly distorted. So being in unity consciousness is once again this beautiful paradox where sometimes we can go so far into one extreme that we end up not being what that started off as at all, versus allowing ourselves to go with just what is genuine within us, that natural impulse for sincerity. Let's just call it that. And that will just naturally guide the way that it inverts, whatever our extreme is at, that inverts. And so to clarify what I meant by like, okay, going to extreme, it's like we can be so hyper wanting to not be in judgment that we are pushing ourselves unknowingly into the opposite extreme, which would be to not judge at all. But that extreme it's an extreme still. So what happens to the extremes? It will invert on itself, which means that we become totally one-dimensional. Why? Because now we are judging the hell out of ourselves for not being in judgment, which I think is how you started this talk.
It's interesting as well because that brings us to this real rub that we find in some ways, because the sort of clarifying factor is oneness and wholeness and unity, right? Like things that are sort of bringing us back to more wholeness sort of are a certain way. But then things that are furthering our separations are a certain way, right? It's difficult because certain people within our community with the best of intentions, and I've been on this side at a certain point, is like the timeline split is a very interesting concept because it's further perpetuating separation between 3D and 5D, right? It's like there's a split there and that's a separation. So it cannot be a spiritual thing, right? But then there's other domains, and, you know, at times this is very clear that, and I oscillate, you know, so I'm just speaking to it, which is, yeah, like there is something that is shifting at the moment and certain people are applying themselves a certain way, and you speak to two different people and literally some people see a whole new earth emerging in some ways, and other people see, you know, like everything is potentially about to be flushed down the toilet. And it's really interesting speaking to different parties of people. So, I mean, how does a split then feed into like a spirit, like a more spiritually unified awakening?
Yeah. The willingness to have things also divide. So it always comes back to this concept of denial and this openness. And so I don't like acceptance because that's not where I'm trying to locate denial. I'm not talking about denial. You either are in denial or acceptance. That's too rigid for what I'm talking about. There's denial or openness inside this transmission. So denial on one end will just deny. And that's why sometimes you can't even fight with somebody, because it will just drain for no reason, because no matter what, the internal, like settings, factory settings is like deny. So then with openness, now there's something that you can actually, engage with. And so when it comes to openness is willing to see not everything as like division is bad. That's like saying, that's why I said inside my latest video, if you're sincere, it'll figure itself out. And sometimes people didn't get it. They're like, what do you mean sincere? I was just like, it'll figure itself out because you're sincere. So then you'll go, oh no, I was wrong. No, it's like that. Oh, I see better. Like, so just being sincere, it will figure itself out. But to speak to the openness doesn't need to stop and go, nope, there's a timeline split. That's a division. How do you know? I know one thing, and that's alchemy is based off of salve et coagula, which is separate to combined again. So to one person, what looks like division might be to another person like a profound clarity that leads to more acceptance. And so what's the difference? Willingness, or what I called openness. So let's not change that term. Openness. If a person's open, they might think one day or for a whole year. Nope. Timeline split is division. Division is bad. But that's just because we have to learn. And so we have to learn by going into different stages of our life. So they're just in a stage because there's so much to gain out of believing that division is bad. And then naturally, they might on their own explore so much of that it inverts. And now it turns into something else like, oh, wait a second, division, we kind of need that because then that's not fair. Like this is like so much of the political systems that have been set up on Earth, like it doesn't matter which one, it started off as a really good idea. And you could see the logic behind it until the logic became like, oh my God, that was awful. Like making everybody just, so not always applying everything to everyone is naturally. So this is why there's core rules to this reality. And one of them is everyone is free. Does that mean that will be honored? No, but at least the universe, that's its masculine way of saying unconditional love. There's a feminine way too, but the masculine way of saying everyone is free, everyone is sovereign. So that we can see as a very clear way of wanting equal distribution, equality. But then, now if we apply that to every single thing across the board and everything in other ways, not just in that primary way, not just in that universal way, but to everything, now that can accidentally, it meant well, just like our political systems all meant well, it can mean well, but accidentally not make sense at all. Once again, that's putting a third grader or a 3-year-old in a room with a 15-year-old. So there's always this need for this one mystical factor that will help bring the harmony. And what that is discernment. Discernment is what will bring, hey, you know what? Division kind of is going to help a lot of people, but not because we're opposing people through that division or opposing people through that maturity or opposing people through that evolutionary impulse. Because the beautiful thing about being in a universe of light is learning the theme of self-love or love in general, but through self. That's like the ego, right? And so learning that. And it's always back to that freedom and unity. And if we now place that with the timeline split, now we're looking at, oh, there's a freedom, meaning a split, but does that mean that unity is lost?
Yeah, just going to let that land. As we're talking about the split, you've mentioned a couple of times in today's podcast that time is not linear. You've implied that time is cyclical. Why do we need to understand that in order to understand the split? What is it about the nature of time that we need to understand? Because you're explaining it before that 4D, you've got 5D, and I almost sort of saw what you were describing earlier about time as in 3D, the third density. It's almost like we're subject to time as if it was above us. I know that's probably an incorrect way to look at it, but it sort of like governs us. But when you move to the 5D, it's almost like the 4D is almost like this tractor of time. And then you're sitting above time. You still are influenced by it, but it doesn't really apply as much. But there are influences of it somewhat, is kind of the visual that I got when you were describing time before. But it's not linear, it's cyclical. But we're talking about a density sort of split, but then the word timeline keeps coming up. What is the importance of understanding timelines in order of understanding the split? Is it because different timelines are available and at different points we maybe flick out into the split? Why is timeline so important in this conversation?
Wow, I don't know what you meant, but now I just got like really expanded from that question. So what I feel called to say from that is that what if all is dictated really by consciousness, which in this case I have not been saying by that term. I've been saying by curriculum. So now I'm going to switch curriculum to consciousness. What if consciousness dictates everything? And because it comes primary, if we were to look at the order of operation in this reality, if consciousness is the highest or the strongest governing factor, then we would have what would be considered Mandela effects. But really, we're in a unified experience, but within that unity, we're having these different timelines all play out, because really the most important thing beyond the show of, to a materialist physicist, not all of the material physicists actually now are getting super awakened. So to a hardcore materialist, they won't put consciousness first, but consciousness doesn't care. So they won't put consciousness first. They'll say, no, what matters the most is, and then they'll value something highly like continuity wise. Like, no, what matters most is like, we're all experiencing the same thing, right? Because it's like super material. So what they're valuing the most is that everything is making one linear logical sense. To consciousness, that's not how it operates. So if consciousness is dictating things, we're still going to have like a unity of an experience, but it's going to look more like a Mandela effect, because consciousness cares more about consciousness versus everything making sense. So why I'm making that distinction between everything making linear sense, is that the different timelines we're going to be experiencing are going to be what will be best for that consciousness, aka curriculum.
Inspired souls, lumen beings, you're obviously liking this video, so please don't forget to give it a like and a thumbs up. It really helps. And also, I'd love for you to join in on the conversation below. Sarah's very active on YouTube, so she might just reply to your questions herself. She's likely going to come back again in the future. What are some of the questions that you've got from Sarah based on today's conversation? And what are your biggest takeaways from today's conversation? Join in on the conversation below. What happens in families? Let's say there's someone that's like doing the work and is actively participating, and their consciousness is primary to their experience. And for someone that's a bit more material and isn't working on it, what happens in those instances as we move further and further into the split? Because I'm sure some people experience that tuning into this podcast. They're in a dynamic or in a relationship, or they've got loved ones where they themselves are doing the work, but other people around them potentially don't feel like they are, which is fine. Everybody's on their own journey, as you alluded to earlier. But what happens to those relationships and those dynamics and where everybody ends up?
Whatever we assign it. For instance, when I was more in judgment during my spiritual awakening, I was heavily trying to get some family members out of Yahweh's grips, as I call it. And we have a great relationship still. I did not get them out of Yahweh's grips. They have explicitly told me, after I have warned them, it's a false heaven. You're just going to go to a arrogant reality from that entity. They've told me, yep, I'm going to go there. And then it became like, what do I assign that? What? So I really would ask the person, even in discernment, where can a person love and let that love in more to help release the calcification of the judgment still, even if it's in the clarity of the person, even if it's in the discernment, because how strong will that go? If a person is dealing with narcissistic abuse within their family, this is a completely different story. So if a person is dealing with narcissistic abuse, They're literally what is also known in another type of paradigm as targeted individuals. From narcissistic abuse is so serious. I just don't have a great time to make a video on it, but I will. If they have family members that are placing on them narcissistic abuse, that's not what I'm talking about. They need to move into such fierce and radical self-love that they are taking actions that so move them out of the realm of those people. But if it's not a narcissistic abuse scenario, then back to what I was saying, the question becomes like, how do we know better for anyone? Especially if a person is now displaying like very blatantly that they don't want to know, or they don't care, or they don't value that. This is about that resonance. If somebody's strongly resonating with whatever they're doing, then we become that serenity prayer. We have to help. I know they didn't say that in the thing, but it's a rectifying of two opposites. It's like, let me know the wisdom to see the difference between things, where I need to change and where I need to accept. And so as natural as it will be for anyone who has a strong sense of purpose, or just who has a strong sense of wanting to elevate the consciousness of others, we're going to naturally be in situations where we accidentally end up being controlling. And that's fine, because I put myself in somebody's shoes. If I was the person who was not spiritually awakened or aware of the timeline split and all that stuff, I would want somebody who is going through a spiritual awakening to grapple with me and to not be in a passive, well, I love you anyways. And then I'd want them to grapple. This is where the phrase, "Are you my brother's keeper?" comes in. That's what it really means. It means, are you going to help people wake up? But then there becomes a specific point, and the specific point is kind of like, can we accept that we loosened the jar and that was our role, and our role was never to see the jar ever come off? Can we accept that we're a bypasser in someone else's movie? We're the NPC. Can we accept that we're not the main character of someone else's movie and get over ourselves and help them and loosen their jar, and then love them enough to let somebody else open the jar, or them to never open the jar, or somewhere where we won't see them open the jar in private? So it becomes this beautiful discernment, once again, with like grappling with somebody because you are them. And you know that at the core, that's what empathy is. Empathy is, even if we don't know it mentally that we're enlightened, our body knows it through empathy. Our empathy is like, no, you're me. That's why like our bodies care about our environment and the world. So your empathy will want to naturally do what's innate to it, which is help make it closer to oneness. And so it's fine if somebody's in judgment. I'd rather be grappled with and saved by somebody because they had a judgment complex than nobody ever waking me up at all. So I want people to hold that, and to hold at the very same time that there is a natural process when that soul contract, shall we say, or when that our time has naturally just dissipated with that person, and now they're teaching us, and the roles flip. And the roles flip, and now they're being our strongest teacher in how to learn how to love somebody who has chosen completely different than us.
Sarah, from your gnosis, how long into this process are we? How much longer do we have in terms of this split? Is it in one of those really macro scales where we're talking decades, or yeah?
So I actually, and I know it won't sound banger, I actually see the like largest in parts of the split this year.
2025.
So, yeah, I see it in 2025. And so that doesn't mean that there's not going to be stuff afterwards, but like when I'm talking about a split, kind of like, you know, the alchemical separation or that cellular mitosis, the the volatility of that I see this year. And then from there will still be, you know, things that continue that process. I'm sure you know that beyond that.
The stages from the last time we chatted on the podcast. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so from there, it's really interesting because I don't know if I don't know if it's too much up in the air. If something is too much up in the air, then at least for me, it won't show me. But I see things going to 2030, and then just after 2030, there's just not much more solidity there. And I think that's because a lot more things might be inside our collective consciousness then, and that right now I might not have that paradigm for it. I don't want to call it paradigm blindness, but yeah, when we don't have, like if we've never seen something before, then we won't be able to imagine it. That's why a lot of times, like I don't know if you've ever heard of paradigm blindness.
No, I haven't, but I can understand there's like a lack of reference.
Yeah, so I'll give a really brute example just to make it clear. An alien could be right by you. And if you don't have ever a reference point for it, you won't see it. And it would be like right there. That's what paradigm blindness is. It's when literally your paradigm does not have any concept or belief, a conceptual, but also a belief. And because of that, something could be right there and your physical eyes, your physical senses will not see it.
Just because it can't accommodate it. That's,
right.
Really interesting. So I think we've discussed this a little bit throughout the podcast. I mean, last call to arms, what is it incumbent upon us to be doing at this time to navigate this time with the most amount of grace?
I think that it's like allowing a person to be led by, sorry, I saw 144, so this is serious. Wow. Okay.
Listen in, everybody.
Yeah. Okay. So I think it's really allowing a person to fully immerse themselves in what they're curious about. Because a lot of people, as I said, are valuing right now maybe beliefs and trying to understand their manifestation power through subconscious powers, through whether that's identifying whatever programs are in the subconscious or simply just amplifying their subconscious realm. And that will be different from someone else's journey who might feel really called right now to explore probably like the depths of the somatic body and that experience versus somebody who might be moving in to a larger, far more subtle, far more invisible space of intention. So it comes back to those 5 aspects of frequency. And so what we should be doing is what I personally believe is developing in whatever area we are with those that we feel called to, that we feel really compelled to and curious about.
Sarah. Truly the alchemist. My goodness. I mean, yeah, thank you so much for diving in so deep into the dimensional split that's ahead of us, which actually turns out to be the density split. Yeah, and there's so many questions that it opens up, and thank you for taking the time to graciously answer so many of the ones that I had for us here today. For those that want to tune into more of your work, obviously your channel is a great resource for so many people online. You mentioned live events though as well, and there's like you're starting to do a lot more work with Gaia as well now. Did you want to just illuminate us on how people can stay more in touch?
Yeah, thank you. So you guys can stay tuned. You'll find me on Gaia at my new series, Mystery Teachings. You will want to see the first season. It was done so well that I was speechless watching the first episode draft. It's like nothing other that has been on Gaia. And the first season happens to be about everything that we're dealing with this year. And I got chills when this year started unfolding the way it did, because I was like, what are the odds? Like literally, we just finished a map of everything happening this year as it's happening. So I'm getting chills again just thinking about it. So yeah, that's my Gaia series. And then yeah, my YouTube channel. I'm still on my YouTube channel, still making content. So yeah, you could catch me on any of those. And then if you'd like to sign up for my newsletter to find out about my in-person offerings like my alchemy retreat or my in-person events, then you could go to my website, thealchemist.community.
We'll put a link to all of that in the show notes and the description below. Sarah, thank you so much for coming on again. It is always such a treat to spend time with you. I literally feel just, blessed every time we get to connect. And as many can tell, this is not just this moment in time, it's your life's work that we get to revel in. So thank you so much for who you are, carrying what you're carrying, sharing what you're sharing. The transmissions are so important for us to receive. Just really grateful for you, sister. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me on again.
Inspired souls, lumen beings, you've made it through to the end of another incredible episode. Obviously, you're loving this podcast, so please do give it a like and a thumbs up. It really helps this video getting shared around the internet. And for all of you that are subscribed to the channel, I just wanted to take a moment out to thank you. Everything you see around here is powered and empowered by your subscription to this channel. You're enabling this entire channel to do what it does, the guests, the show, the production. Everything is thanks to your subscription to the channel. Thank you so much for your incredible love and your support. To all of you that haven't yet subscribed, please do take a moment. As I'm saying the word subscribe, the button below is lighting up in the colors of the Inspired Evolution. Please hit that subscribe button, hit the bell notification icon, and join the community, join the movement, spreading love, positivity, and wisdom like this around the planet together. Thank you so much in advance for doing so. I appreciate you and your support. On screen now, an opportunity for you to dive even deeper into the wisdom of the split. Kerry Kay explains the 3D, 5D split that we're going to in her own words. And also on screen, an episode with Sarah Elkhaldy about her occult mysticism and awareness of alchemy and the different stages of alchemy explained really in depth. She explained one of the stages that we're going through today. If you want to understand the entire process, that's in this video here. And another really incredible hidden in disguise occult alchemist is William Whitecloud. So tune into that one. Yeah, go on, take your pick, make your click, and I'll see you in the next one.